Every time I get up here, I just feel like I have got to tell y'all, I am not a preacher or a pastor, but I do want to share with you tonight some things that God has called me to do, and when the pastor asked me if I would share tonight, he said he needed to get me back in the saddle. And believe it or not, I used to really enjoy this. I liked getting up in front of people, and I liked speaking. I've got that kind of personality. But it's been a while, and I thought, how come I don't do it as much? It's like I want to, but I don't. And I finally realized what it was. It is getting back in the saddle. I used to be always doing something in the way of ministry, and so getting up here and sharing was nothing. It was no big deal. In fact, I looked forward to it because I was always doing something. And my son has kind of re-sparked me now. He reminds me of what I used to be, and I just finally realized. See, I know something that he doesn't know. And that is, he's going to blink his eyes and be an old man. I know that. I blinked. I'm using this stool because my knees are shot. I mean, you know what I'm saying? He doesn't realize at this point yet the brevity of life, how quick it goes by and stuff. And so, I'm glad for him. But he's so on fire right now. He comes over to me all the time, and we're trying to grow the church. And have you noticed how many visitors we've had? I mean, that's really cool. I sit back here and I look around. I go, man, we're doing something. And he invited like 9 or 10 people one Sunday, and they all showed up. And I'm tickled to death that he's excited and he's on fire about it like that, because that's what he needs to be. It's kind of it's strange to hear him now. It's like he wants to be in ministry and he wants to do things, and so he'll go talk to somebody and he'll get them right to the point of leading them to Christ, and he brings them to me. Sort of like what we do when we're out witnessing. Let's go to church. We always try to grit people into church instead of witnessing to them all at the same time. The difference between my calling that I woke up to and realized about 30 years ago was evangelist. I went on a missions trip, and to this day it was just a supernatural, phenomenal trip that things happened on that you would never imagine, stuff like you read in the Bible. And after that, man, I was so hooked. I just wanted to do it. But the neat thing about it is, as a pastor, you pretty well got to know the whole Bible. You pretty well got to be on top of it. A pastor's job is to have a church, build a church. A pastor's main, I think, heart for most of them is to see the body grow, not just in numbers, but spiritually. For them, it's to build the kingdom. It's to disciple people, watch them grow. Grow in the Lord and know things. Because I've talked to a lot of pastors, and the most disappointing thing for all of them is they get up here and they preach and preach and preach, and nobody ever changes, or nothing ever happens, and that's disappointing for anybody. But truly, for a pastor, that's a pastor's heart. They want to see you grow and change and stuff. And we're fortunate that we have a great pastor, and really just the growth in the church. When you get growth in the church, it comes from people growing spiritually. It comes from renewing your mind. It doesn't just happen. People get excited about what they're hearing and what they're doing, and that's how you grow the church. for an evangelist, it's kind of different. Not that you don't care about that stuff, but you know what I need to know out of the Bible to be an evangelist? The gospel. Now, a lot of people sitting out there are thinking, well, that's the Bible. It's really not. The difference between knowing the Bible and knowing the gospel is the gospel is literally, it means good tidings or good news. You know, I have to be able to go out and share the good news of Christ with somebody. And it's not that discipling them is not important, because it is. I'll just tell you the way I feel about it. If without discipling people, you're on the verge, knowing Christ is almost on the edge of meaning nothing. You know, because instantly, you know, Satan comes in to steal the seed and to confuse them and mess with their mind and stuff. And so, you know, you've got to be discipled. And a lot of people, in fact, every big evangelistic team that is in that full time for ministry or whatever, always have a discipleship team that stays behind. They'll come in. If you've been to a Franklin Graham or Billy Graham, you know, man, they come in weeks ahead of time and prepare all the churches and the local things and get people ready. And then they always leave a team behind to disciple people, or put a team in place to disciple people. Well, it's the same way when you go overseas, or, you know, on the missions field or something like that, on a lesser scale. But we always meet with the churches over there. You never go on the missions field as an evangelist and just go out and drum up a crowd. Because, like I said, if you don't disciple the people, sometimes you can do more harm than good, because in a lot of places, I've been to Africa twice. In Africa, Jesus is just another God. You know, they've got 10 or 12. They've got God for everything. And so unless you disciple them and tell them what the difference is with Jesus, it does very little good. For me, after my first missions trip, man, I really had a heart for people who have never heard about Jesus. You just can't imagine. I could sit here all night and explain it to you, but you just can't imagine what it's like to be around people who have never heard of Jesus. You know, in this country, you know, my dad used to tell me every time, I guess he was always worried about me or scared because of some of the places that I would go. And he would always go, well, why do you have to go there? Can't you tell people about Jesus here? You know, that seems like that's the main thing that people say when you tell them you're going to some place where there's a lot of violence, a lot of stuff. You know, well, you know, there's people here. But you know, the truth of the matter is, there's a church on every corner in this country. I mean, you would be hard-pressed to find anybody that's not heard of Jesus in this country. In fact, so much so to the point that he's almost lost. They don't know the good news. They don't understand what the good news of Jesus is, you know, of knowing what he means. Also, the reason that for me, the gospel is the good news, and why I refer to it that much and stay on it that much, is because it is the goodness of Christ that leads us to repentance. You know, it's not that hellfire and brimstone preaching. There's a lot of that. I mean, that used to scare me to death when I was little and would hear that. And, you know, for 2 or 3 hours, I'd try to behave. I'd try to be good because I was scared of what might happen and all that. But the truth of the matter is, when I come to repentance and know the Lord, it was because of the love that he had. It was because of what he had died and done for me and saved us. And so that, more than anything, the goodness of God is the free gift of eternal life. That's the purpose of Jesus coming and dying for us. the good news about that is God doesn't want anybody going to hell. Knowing the gospel, as I call it, the good news about Christ is you don't have to give a lot of religious instruction. You don't have to have a lot of religious observances and stuff like that most people don't know and stuff. There's churches out there that, man, it's a big to do to get saved, and it's a big to do to go through to just to have a church service or something like that. When you're on the missions field, people don't understand that. They don't. And most missionaries don't either. They don't understand that. The thing that you try to express to somebody that doesn't know Jesus is that it is a gift. It's a free gift. You don't have to do anything. I have never went anywhere or talked to people to where they didn't always have something that they had to get rid of before they could come to Christ. I think back on the missions field and talking to people, and I was talking to this one guy, and he gambled and he drank and he womanized and he done all this stuff, and I was sharing with him about Christ and how Christ had died for all of that, listen, but most people, even people in this country, feel like you have to clean your act up before you can come to Christ. You have to get cleaned up before Jesus can do anything for you, and so that makes it sharing the gospel. Man, if you had, Jesus made it so easy. But if you had to share everything else and all this other stuff with people, you never would get them saved. And the fact that people always asking, I remember this one guy, he said, you don't understand. He says, I know when you leave here this evening, I'm going to drink. And I said, you don't understand. God knows when you leave here this evening, you're going to drink. The difference is, are you going to drink saved, or are you going to drink as a sinner? I try to explain stuff to people. The gospel is God's grace. And a lot of people don't understand this, but, Jesus died for your sins, past, present, and future sins. And I will forget, almost getting kicked out of a church because somebody asked me a question that, you mean if I go out here and do something wrong this afternoon, God's going to forgive me for it? I said, He's already forgave you. If you're saved, if you've given your life to the Lord, then yes, the sin you commit this evening has already been forgiven. Now, what I would tell you is just what Paul said in Romans when he went through it. If you're truly saved, and this is the truth, everybody in here that's saved knows this, God's not interested in your habits. God's interested in your heart. But when you get your heart right, your habits take care of themselves. I mean, there is nothing that I used to do. I tell you this that you won't believe, because I still shoot pool. And one of the biggest things that I remember, when my mom, and not my dad so much, but my mom and my grandparents more than anything, you got to get saved. You got to go to church. You got to do this. Man, y'all don't understand how much I love to shoot pool. I got to give that up. I'm not going to give that up. I'm not ready to give up my habits yet. And that's really the way people think. I mean, I've had people up at the altar, and they're not praying for salvation. They're praying, they are praying for salvation, but it's again. You know what I'm saying? They've messed up, so they need to pray for salvation again or again, and they don't realize God's grace and what it amounts to. It's already been forgiven, and if you can ever convince somebody, anybody, but especially on the missions field, what separates our God from any other gods, other than the fact that He's resurrected, is He forgives you. He gives you grace. You don't have to get cleaned up before you come to Christ. And if you mess up after you come to Christ, you're still forgiven. Eventually, it's like I see people. One of the worst things I think as Christians that we do is backbiting. I mean, I really do. I think that's probably worse than most things that would go on. But I never will forget this church where everybody in this crowd would sit over here and talk about all the ones who come to church and this crowd that smoked. I mean, and I'm sitting there going, y'all just don't get it. It doesn't matter. When God gets ready to deal with them about smoking, he'll deal with them. And until that time, his grace covers them. But it's hard to convince people of that. It's easier sometimes to convince people that don't know anything about Christ than it is to convince people here in the United States or in town. The one thing that I try to tell my son now that I'm working on and trying to tell him, and for anybody else, is that the reason he brings people to me after he's talked to them and he's told them about this wonderful church that he goes to and how much he loves the pastor and loves the people, and man, if you'll just come, you'll really love it, and he'll talk to them and they'll ask him a question, and it could be his name, and he immediately grabs them and runs to me. He's so afraid he's going to give somebody the wrong answer or say the wrong thing. And I try to tell him, I said, son, the gospel is so easy. God made it that easy just for us. The gospel amounts to this. All you have to do is believe and receive. Receive what Jesus has done through his death, burial, and resurrection. Believe that and receive the cleansing from all your sin and the freedom and the liberty that it brings. Listen, that's it in a nutshell. If you can say that to somebody, and they believe it and honestly mean it, they're saved. You've led them on. The rest of it from that point on is God's job. He knows their heart. He knows their habits. He'll work on what he needs to work on. I can't believe with me personally, it was like he supernaturally delivered me from just a lot of stuff. And sometimes to this day I have a hard time believing the stuff that he supernaturally delivered me from. And you know what else I have? Just as hard a time believing the things I still struggle with. I mean, I think, man, I've read that, I know that, I've went out and told other people this, and yet here I still struggle with it. I'm just now, I won't say just now getting to, but I have to remind myself all the time of God's grace. Even myself, I go out and tell people about God's grace, and I can preach on that to people about God's grace. But then when it comes to me and I do something stupid or do something wrong, I have to remind myself of God's grace and remember that, because we're all going to mess up. We're all going to do that. If you can get it in your head, just to believe and receive, if you can get to where you can tell people that, I mean, truly and honestly, that's what grows the church, and that's what we need to do, and we need to reach out to people and not be fearful, but also just to tell the simple truth about Christ and bring people to church and get them in here. If you can do that, people just grow. Did you just turn me on? I just got louder. Oh, well. But there's also a lot of things. There's lots of scripture in the Bible to back it up. You always want to have, when I say all you got to know is the gospel, that's sort of a joke. I mean, that's really all you need to do when you go out to evangelize somebody, is just know the gospel and know what the gospel is and all that. But you always need to renew your mind. I mean, the change that I've had in my life has usually been through bad times, bad things, but also things that when I look back on, man, I don't know that I would change a thing. I might would go through that same thing again because it's been some of the most spiritual growth that I've ever had in my life, and so you constantly need to renew your mind, and that's the pastor's job too. He, come to church every Sunday and he'll help you do that. Satan is always the little things that he does. I mean, a person comes up to the altar here. Every time I pray with somebody at the altar, I literally try to catch them before they get out the door to remind them that before you get to your car, Satan's going to try and talk you out of this. Satan's going to try and make you believe that this wasn't real, that nothing happened, that you're no more saved now than you were when you walked in here. But it's so important to say that to them and to give them Bible verses, scriptures and stuff. I've got some that I keep wrote down in my Bible, like John 3:3 is why, Romans 3:23 is who, and Acts 3:19 is how. And I keep them wrote down, even like trying to give people scripture for salvation. I write them in my Bible. This one's first, and then right beside that I write the next one, so that you can just flip through your Bible and you go through. It makes you look smart, smarter than you are. It makes you look smart, and you can go on and do that. It's Romans Road. There's all sorts of things, and it's so smart to have them wrote down because people are going to ask you questions. The best thing when somebody asks you something is not try to act like you know it all. The only thing you really need to know is that it's a free gift from God, and He's changed your life, and the best thing is you just share your testimony. Whatever you've done in your life, there's nothing you have to make up with that. There's nothing you have to remember. You just share how God's changed your life. And as God's changed your life, He can change their life. And He will. I know I've told you parts of missions trips and stuff like that. Every time I've been up here, I've told you some. But it takes a while. It takes a while for you to understand. I think to me it takes a while for you to learn God's voice. You know what I'm saying? It just takes a while before you learn God's voice. But once you learn God's voice, man, it's so cool to speak to God and know the answers and stuff. And I never will. I've had all sorts of things. I remember one time pulling out of a red light, and I drove a tractor trailer at the time, and it was pouring down rain, and I was empty. I was going to pick a load up in Lynchburg, and they're very dangerous when they're empty. They'll slide everywhere and all that. And I pulled out of Hardee's on 460 down there, and I said a prayer. I said, Lord, keep me safe. And then literally I started laughing. I said, like, God ain't got anything better to do than keep me safe. Like that's really an important agenda that He's got right now to keep me safe. And I just kind of chuckled about it and laughed about it and went down the road. I went 1 mile, and a car pulled right out in front of me. And I slammed the brakes on, and the trailer jackknifed and was coming around, and I thought, I'm going to kill I don't know how many people, I know this guy's dead. I looked right through the car and seen his eyes looking up at me. And I said, and whoever's on this side of me's gone. And all of a sudden the trailer just snapped back, and he was gone, and I heard God's voice. And it was almost like He chuckled and said, I listen. My wife thinks I'm nuts when God speaks to me sometimes. I remember one time I was talking with God, and I told her, I said, and this is what He said to me. And, I got really bad grammar. And she started laughing, and she said, oh, God said ain't. I said, well, I don't know what to tell you, but that's what He said. He knows what I'll understand and what I won't. But in 1991, the first mission trip that I ever went on, a friend of mine talked me into going, and I went. I had a stirring in me about it anyway. But I've had people come up to me since then. This is in '91, and I've had people come up and say, "Well, things like that don't happen in the Bible don't happen anymore." But they do, man. I have seen people healed. I've seen a girl paralyzed in Mexico get up and start running around. We were giving out toys. She didn't want a toy. She ran to her grandmother and just started crying and jumping and hollering, and her grandmother was doing the same thing. I've witnessed stuff like that. The first missions trip that I went on was so supernatural. Now, what I didn't know about that trip was everybody else thought it was supernatural too. It was my first trip. I didn't know that this wasn't the norm. But we were in Mexico, and there was a group of about 15 or 20 of us, and we were going from house to house. And, they give you this little sheet where you learn to speak some kind of Mexican. And, needless to say, I don't talk very good Befort, much less Mexican. So, but when I left that first house, I remember praying, Lord, I did not just come down here for the sake of coming down here. I did not just come down here so I could say I've been on a missions trip. I don't want this to be fake. I don't want this to be just something that I did that I can go back and say I've been on a missions trip. I said, you need to get me involved. You need to make me get involved. So we walk over to the very next house. This is a group of about 15 or 20 people. I am dead last. Man, I'm at the back of the pack. Got my little sheet, KD, La Se, La Bandinga, trying to learn Spanish. And this guy just stops everything, and he looks at me, and he goes, hey, you in the back. He said, the Lord's telling me for you to do this house. I mean, this is seconds after I just prayed for the Lord to do that. I about fell over. Of course, I took my little sheet up there, and the lady's laughing like crazy at me. I guess she could speak English too, but she wouldn't. But, that kind of thing happened, and I thought, oh, man, that was weird. I mean, can you imagine God doing something like that? I just thought, well, that was probably, after God moves, you always come up with a reason for it. You pray over somebody and they get healed, and you say, well, maybe I guess that aspirin kicked in. That headache's gone. We do it all the time. Stuff like that. But I remember that morning we went out, and we come up to a brothel. I mean, that's what it was a brothel, and we asked to speak to the people, and the lady run us off. And she didn't want us around there. Christians are bad for business and all this stuff. And so, but what we did was we joined hands, and we circled that building, and we prayed over that building, and then we broke up and went on our day. Do you know we held church in that building that night? That night we held church. I mean, we sat on cinder blocks and everything, but that lady come and found the leader of this group and all that, and that night we had church in it. I mean, I couldn't, you hear stuff like that, but to experience it. We were walking down the street. It was me and two other guys was walking down the street, and this guy throws his liquor bottle on the ground. Now, we were probably maybe from here to the back there, from him. And he throws his liquor bottle on the ground, and we don't know what's going on. We just keep walking towards him, and as we get closer, he starts hollering at us about Jesus. He saw Jesus walking with us. He saw an angel with us, and he knew what it was. And so we prayed for him right then and there, and I'm thinking, I've never seen anything like this. I've never witnessed anything like this. So I'm really amazed. We were walking down one dusty, dirty street, and some lady ran outside. There was about 6 of us then, ran outside, and she hollered, people of God, come pray for my daughter. I mean, she could tell, she could see. The presence of God was so thick and so heavy and all around us, to where things just happened, one thing after another. And I couldn't see it. I'm sitting there wondering, what is it? How do these people know? You know, to run up to people and call them people of God and invite them in to pray for their sick daughter, which we did. Her husband absolutely hated us. He didn't want us in her house at all, in his house. But that's what was so strange. We went in and prayed for this girl probably 15 or 20 minutes. And to be honest with you, nothing miraculously happened to her at that time. But we walked out, going back past him to the garage, and, man, he was hot and cussing and everything at us when we come in. But when we walked out, he was on his knees crying like a baby and asked us to pray for him, you know, for salvation. And so that was the meeting. That was the reason that God had us to go there, to that place. I remember going to one place outside. This was a little church. It was probably, man, quarter of this room. But it was a little church, and I was scared to death because he had told me before we went in there that I had to share my testimony. And outside of the church, there's 7 or 8 people drinking beer, throwing bottles, you know, the hoodlum type. I could relate to them better than I could the others, to be honest with you. But, you know, and then there was kids on bicycles outside riding around the church and all that stuff. So I shared my testimony, and the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, if anybody comes forward, I'm going to go pray with them. And so, you know, I finished, and I'd walk back to my seat, and everybody just sat there. You know, nobody moves. And I said, Lord, if anybody will get up and go up front, I will go pray with them. Well, a man gets up, and he comes up front. And instantly I go, well, Lord, I don't know really whether that's the custom. I don't know really whether I should do that. Trying to talk myself out of it after I just sat right there and told God I would go do it. But anyway, I did get up. I said, I'm not leaving this place after seeing all that. And then, you know, after all I had seen that day, no way, I'm testing God. So I go up there and I pray with him. And this is on a gravel floor. You know, I'm telling you, it was rough. And but I sat up there and I prayed with him. And to be honest, it felt like 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, it didn't seem like no time at all. But then when I went to get up, I couldn't move. And I opened my eyes and I looked around. Everybody in that church was at the altar. Everybody was at the altar. I couldn't even move. It was so packed. And what was even crazier than that is when I got up and walked back to one of the guys in leadership that was there, you know, I was looking around. He said, Hank, we've got to go. He said, we've been here too long. I said, been here 5 minutes. He said, you've been there 3 hours. That 5 minutes was 3 hours. I couldn't believe it. And the guys that was drinking the beer and throwing the bottles were inside praying, and the kids riding their bikes around. All the bikes was at the front door, and they were inside praying. God's Spirit just fell on that place to the point that it just throughout the neighborhood. You know, I mean, it was amazing to see that kind of thing happen. And I mean, it was it just, the whole trip was like that. The last day we were there, I went and set up, we had this church, but we knew the crowds was going to be bigger than the church would hold. So we went and set everything outside. We was taking chairs and setting them outside and tables outside and all that stuff. Well, we worked for probably an hour or hour and a half setting everything outside. And, you know, at that point, I just kind of started praying for the service that was going to take place. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't speaking. I wasn't sharing testimony. I wasn't doing anything. So I was just walking around praying for those that were going to be part of it. And, you know, an hour or so went by, and now people are starting to fill up and all that. And I go, this is the end of the trip. Last day. After this, we're going to get on the plane to come back to. And so I'm kind of reflecting on this whole trip, how amazing it was. All the stuff that took place, I just could not believe it. And I'm at a point now to where when I'm talking with God, I know I'm talking with God. I mean, he's hearing me and I'm hearing him, and he's answering everything. I really got, I'm going to be careful what I say, because I could have asked for anything, and I think God would have made it happen. But I remember sitting there going, well, I guess I'm done. This has been an amazing trip, and for my part, I guess I'm done, and I was giving thanks to God and all that. And then this lady walks up to me, and she said, do you have anything to do with the service? And I said, no. I said, I'm part of the group that's down here. I said, but no, I don't have anything to do with that. And she said, well, I need your help. And I said, wow, what's going on? She said, there's 15 teenagers over here, and she said, they're a real bad group, and I need you to talk to them. I go, okay. So I go over there, and I get right in the middle of them, and literally, like I said, I felt more comfortable around the troublemakers and stuff than I did the other people. And so there was 10 or 15 standing around there, and they were like, who are you? She was translating for me. And so I just started sharing my testimony with them. And I shared, it's funny when you share your testimony because you got a life of it. For me, anyway, God kind of gives me which parts I'm supposed to share with what group I'm with. You know what I'm saying? And so I just started telling these people about the way I had been brought up, the way I'd been raised, and, the things that were going on. And about 15 or 20 minutes went by, and this guy starts crying. Finally, this girl starts crying. I don't know even what's going on. I don't know whether I've said something wrong. I don't know whether I've said something right, But all of a sudden, God just descended on us. Every person standing there went to their knees and lifted their hands and started calling out to Jesus, Jesus, and crying and praying. Myself included, I'm on the ground and all that. I can't believe everything that's taken place and how it's taken place. Now, I will tell you that I've been on tons of mission trips since then, and I have seen healings, and I have seen blessings, and I've seen things take place that are of God, that you can tell of God. But I've never been on a trip to where every day, all day long, the supernatural took place like it did this trip. And I never knew until probably that was in 1991, and one of the guys, Daniel Guerrero, was one of the missionaries from down in that area. He could speak English and Spanish and all that. He had come to my house up here in Virginia, and we were sitting out on the deck, and I said, Danny, do you remember that trip? Do you remember? And we start reminiscing about it and all that, and he looks at me and he said, man, you don't have a clue, do you? And I said, I don't have a clue about what? He said, that wasn't a normal trip. He said, I've been a missionary for 30 years. He said, I've never seen nothing like that. So it was just as special to him as it was me. We neither one of us had seen anything, not seen God work like he had in that way. And I say all that because here recently, in the last month or so, I've got a lot of stuff going on. Most of you might probably know my wife's had cancer twice now and had surgery and stuff, and I got bad knees and looking at having to get both of them replaced, and just a lot of stuff going on. And yet God's stirring something in me. I sit back there and I'm going, oh, because I know it. I know what that feeling is. When God's stirring something in you, and you go, oh Lord, what is it? What's he going to do? Because if you've been down the road I've been down, you just don't know. God can have you do anything, because when you can't do it on your own and it's impossible to do, then it's God. And that's when God will put you in a place or put you in a situation or even give you supernatural strength and abilities to do whatever it is that he calls you to do. And all I know is that it has something to do obviously with this church, but also with my son, both of them. Now, one comes to church here. You know him. He's the Duck Dynasty beard guy. And he's on fire, too. He's really out there trying to do. But my other one, every time he goes to church, somebody comes up to him and prophesies over him. You know, some lady come up to him, she told him, said, "Do you realize that you have all 5 gifts?" You know, and of course he don't even know what the gifts are. He's looking around. He's thinking, I didn't bring nothing in here with me. So, but truly, and when he was 8 years old, he was going out to play, and he turned around and he stuck his head back in the door, and he said, "Hey, Dad," he said, "did you realize one day I'm going to be a preacher?" And I just kind of looked at him and I said, "No, son, I didn't know that." He said, "Yep." He said, "But it ain't going to be like the church we was going to, that pastor." He said, I said, "It ain't." He said, "Nope." He said, "I'm going to preach in bars and on corners and all over the world." You know, and I'm going, because I listen to stuff like that, you know, and because I know it can happen. Well, now he's fighting it with all he's worth. I mean, I've gotten him to come a couple times. Y'all pray for him. His name's Justin. But, and I took one of them anointed rags home and put it in his car. You know, he don't know it, but it's there. But I just know that it has something to do, this stirring that I feel in me has something to do with this church and with my son and my other son. So, you know, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know that it's missions work or missions field or what it's going to be. But I know the stirring in this church for me is, just like Pastor said when he said you need to get back on the saddle. He's right. I need to get back. You know, if you've experienced the things I've experienced and then you don't, you know the worst feeling you can have? That God's done with you. That God will put you on the shelf. You know, and I've taken several years off. And by off, I mean off. But I know that he's doing something now. I don't know what it is, but I will know. And I know that it involves my family. And because of the things that they've been, both of them have been on mission trips. I made it a point to take them on there. That's where they started first calling me Pastor Daddy, you know, because I had to preach one night, and my youngest one at the time was 5 or 6. Pastor Daddy, he's running all over the place. So everybody's coming up to me and asking me if I'm the pastor. No, I assure you I'm not the pastor. And then my older son, he's been on a couple of them too. And he feels the burden to do something. You know, we just don't know what it is yet. And I can tell you, let me just tell you this too. The thing that bothers me the most about me right now is I've heard God speak, and I've heard God talk to me, and I've seen God direct my life. And now I struggle to hear God's voice. I'm just being honest with you. I know he's stirring something up in me, and I know he's doing something. But if you're not in that word every day, and you're not renewing your mind every day, and you're not putting God first every day, God doesn't move away from you, but you move away from God. And hopefully you'll be like me, and one day you'll realize that you've moved away. And now I'm moving back. I can already tell you, you know, I've been, since I started coming to this church, since even before we came here, or when we were at the other church, and I started going there. But I can just tell you, God's getting ready to do something, and it's going to be big, and I want to be a part of it. I want to be a part of it in this church. I want to be a part of it in y'all's lives. You know, it's nothing like experiencing God talking to you and touching you and leading and guiding you in the things. When you think that the things that you read in here and you go, man, I wish God could do that again. I'm telling you, God can do anything in this book today. And he's willing to. I promise you, it's not that he's not willing. Most of the time, we get too scared. You know, it's just like I'm telling my son, what's the big deal? Just tell him about Jesus and all that. I understand his fear. I've been there. His fear is they'll ask him something he can't answer, or his fear is he'll say something wrong. You know, and that's where the enemy robs us as a people and as a church and everything. It's amazing to me how hard it is to water and feed faith, and how easy it is to feed and water doubt. I mean, tremendously easy. You get a little doubt, and before long, I mean, you're questioning whether there is a God, and yet it's so hard to get that faith back and to feed that. But I see something happening in this church. I every Sunday when I come in here and I see it filling up and stuff. And this past Sunday we had so many people here, and I had several of my family that wasn't here, and we still had a lot of people here. And so I know that God's getting ready to do something in this church, and I'm so thankful for Pastor David and Pastor Jill and the things that's going to happen. But I'm really thankful for the people in here. This is Wednesday night, and we're here, and I'm thankful for, I don't call people out or names or anything like that, but there are several people in this church that God has placed on my heart that I feel like have a ministry that He's gonna blossom into something. I mean, I think we're really getting ready to see some things happen in this church, and be a part of it. To be a part of it's going to be fantastic, going to be great. And the unity of this church, the spiritual unity of this church. You know, we're all brothers and sisters in this church, and you know, I love that. I think that's one of the greatest things too. You know, it's just going to be. I feel sure that it's going to be, for me anyway. My goal in life is to get back to that first mission trip. I want to see the supernatural every day. I want to see the supernatural in people's lives. I want to be able to look at you and go, can you believe that? And you go, no way. I can't believe that. You know what I'm saying? The same thing for everything. We're as a church, we're going to bust wide open, I think. And I look forward to it. And we got great leadership and great people and great pastors and preachers, teachers,